Thank you all for being here. I'm Noelle Skadinsky, Editorial Director of Book Business and Publishing Executive Magazines and the Publishing Business Conference Director. We have a really exciting program lined up for you in the next couple of days, and in fact, I think it's our best event ever. I am a little biased, of course, but we get better every year. I am very honored here to introduce to you David Granger, the editor of Esquire, who we're honored to have as a co-chair of this year's conference and a member of Publishing Executive's Editorial Advisory Board. David was named editor-in-chief of Esquire magazine in June of 1997. Since his arrival, the magazine has entered into one of its most successful eras. Between 1998 and 2009, Esquire was a finalist for 54 National Magazine Awards, the industry's highest honors, and has won 15, including the Award for General Excellence in 2006. The Society of Publication Designers named Esquire Magazine of the Year in 2001, and it was a finalist for the award again in 2005, 2006, 2008, and 2010. In 2004 and again in 2010, David was named the magazine industry's Editor of the Year by Advertising Age and Adweek. As if that's not enough, Esquire was named Publishing Innovator of the Year in 2009 by Publishing Executive Magazine, and in March, Esquire received a National Magazine Award for its iPad app. Prior to becoming editor-in-chief at Esquire, David was the executive editor at GQ for nearly 6 years. If you'll please welcome David Granger.
Hi, as Noel said, I am David Granger, and it's my job and my pleasure to welcome you to the 2011 Publishing Business Conference. I'm pleased to be co-chair of this conference, but I just have to be honest with you for a second here. Being co-chair of this conference means that I sit in the chair while Noel does all the work, gathering these sort of amazing group of speakers you're going to hear over the next couple of days. As you know, the conference theme this year is Thriving in a New Media Universe. Again, to be completely forthcoming, I don't want to sound bitter, but I advocated for giving this event a completely different title. I lost out. So being the sore loser that I am, I've decided to give a speech with the title that I suggested for the entire conference. Today, I'm going to try to convince you that everything is possible. That was my suggestion for the theme of the conference, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but it was ignored. Now, that phrase, everything is possible, will mean very different things to different people. There are a lot of different parts of the media universe represented here, book publishers, people who publish B2B magazines or websites, and many other things. And I'm sorry to inform you that I know nothing about those businesses, but I guess I'm afraid that you're going to have to bear with me as I gas on about something using examples from the consumer magazine business. The only words of encouragement I can offer before I begin are that I'm not going to talk for very long, and some of my examples are funny. It took me a long time and an entire revolution in media to come to the conclusion that everything is possible. It was not easy. Noel and anybody else who knows me know that I assume that everything is going to go wrong. In fact, I believe that the best things we do at Esquire arise out of the three key elements of desperation, despondency, and despair. Nothing motivates an editor, and I can say this from personal experience, like the moment he or she realizes with absolute conviction that, oh, fuck, we have nothing. Sort of a monthly happenstance at Esquire. In any case, my journey toward the conclusion that everything is possible began with such a moment of despair. That was about 5 years ago. That moment caused me to question everything we were doing, and we embarked on a 5-year process that led us to where we are today, where I'm trying to tell you that everything is possible. So about 5 years ago, about this time of year, I had that moment that editors enjoy. It's like the day your first bound magazine comes. You know, it comes direct from the printer. They snip the edges of the top right-hand corner so that you know that it's a first bound, and you get to sit there with the fruits of your labor. And I remember sitting there with my magazine, going through it, and I like my magazine. It's quite good. We do good stories. Sometimes it's beautiful. But I remember sitting there and thinking, wow, I've been here for 9 years, and it's still a magazine. I mean, I guess I had assumed somehow after 9 years it would be more than a magazine. And so I had one of those profound moments of self-doubt. And so I did what I always do when I have profound moments of self-doubt. I call all the smart people I know and ask them to come help me. So in this case, I called all my editors and my writers, and we convened at this crappy little Italian restaurant called Da Tommaso on 8th Avenue, where we always convene for issues of Moment. And we had dinner. And after everybody had been sort of properly lubricated, I gave them a quiz. And I'm going to give you this same quiz from that night. So, okay, it's a 2-part quiz. And I have to tell you, it's really easy. But here we go. What is this? Oh, it's a bottle of ketchup. That's correct. So if that's a bottle of ketchup, then what is this? Also a bottle of ketchup. Slightly aged now. This is from 5 years ago. But not only is it a bottle of ketchup, it is the greatest consumer product innovation in the history of man. Because it takes the same tasty and delicious content that's in here, and it makes it so much more easily accessible. And what Heinz was smart enough to do was on their labels, they would put jokes or cross promotions. Don't forget the Ore-Ida potatoes. So anyway, that was the first part of my, greatest consumer product innovation ever. So then the second part of my quiz was I held up this, and I said, so what is this? And a magazine. It's a magazine. So it happens to be the first issue of Esquire magazine, printed in the fall of 1933. So I asked them this magazine. And then I held up whatever was currently on our newsstand. I think it was this, and I said, so if this is a magazine, then what is this? And they said, well, it's a magazine. I said, yes, you are technically correct. That too is a magazine, but it is also the same fucking thing. And so what I was, and the reaction was fantastic. I mean, what I was trying to say was, why don't we have our ketchup bottle? Why haven't we moved beyond this kind of stuff? And the challenge that I was putting in front of my writers and editors was, let's rethink everything we assume about how we make a magazine. Paper, ink, should there be tables of contents? What should covers look like? Just let's start from the beginning. I start from scratch. It was interesting to gauge the reactions. The editors were charged up. They were stoked by the challenge I was presenting them. The writers were a little more cautious. They're a little less enthusiastic. Writers, as talented as they are and as wonderful as they are, and I'd rather hang out with writers than anybody, they tend to be like the tenured faculty at universities. They don't really want anything to change, because when there's change, maybe their word counts will shrink. Anyway, it was interesting in a discussion, some might say an argument, some might say a shouting match followed, and until our design director, who'd just started at that point, he's been there less than a year, stood up and asked a question. He said, how many of you writers had pieces in the 70th anniversary series of issues that featured Britney Spears on the cover? And he was referring to this cover of the magazine, and all of them did, because big issue, lots. And he said, no one remembers your stories. And in addition to trying to insult my writers, I think what he was saying is the first experience that anybody has of a magazine is the tangible one. It's the paper, it's the ink, it's what you do with pictures, it's what photographers do. It's all the basic elements. And so we set out to question all the basic elements of what went at Esquire. And so given the gratifying response I'd gotten from this dinner, I started giving this quiz to everybody else. I gave it to the rest of my staff. I went to the Hearst manufacturing division, the people who actually make our products, and I gave them the quiz. They were so excited by the quiz that they invited their top 6 vendors, printers and ink and paper people, to come in, and I gave them the quiz. And so we began, the result was that we asked ourselves some fundamental questions. And one of the first questions came from my production director, who said, well, if we're going to continue to print on paper and use ink, and we're going to continue to be, roughly 8 inches by 11 inches, why don't we use the margins of the magazine? Because he says, when I was a little kid, Mad Magazine, I used stuff in the margins, but no magazines seem to use the margins anymore. So we started doing little things in the margins. We do jokes in the margins. We do illustrations in the margins. And probably the biggest thing we did was this thing that we called marginal fiction, where it's hard to see on this slide, but we ran an entire piece of fiction in the bottom margin of the magazine. This was the beginning of the first sentence. So over the course of 114 pages or whatever, you get like 7 words per page, 12 to 14 words per spread, and you actually had to interact with the magazine in a totally new way. You page through the magazine. And I remember the first time I did it, I was on a subway going out to watch the U.S. Open, and I was paging through and reading the story, but I also got this sort of peripheral preview of what was going on in the magazine. And it was fantastic. Oh, that looks interesting. Oh, a pig. What's a pig doing there? And so it caused people to have an experience of the magazine that they never had before. We quickly moved away from that. And as I said before, we asked, why is there a table of contents? I mean, do people use a table of contents? If there is a table of contents, should it look like magazine tables of contents do, which are generally relatively ugly? So we started changing our table of contents. I mean, the first iteration was fairly commonplace. We moved quickly from that to this new thing where we thought people might be interested in how long the stories were. And so we did little charts that showed exactly what they were in for if they chose to read those stories. And we moved on from there to actually creating works of art from the elements of the magazine. So we took details from photographs and created little sort of visual sculptures. One of the things I learned from this particular one is that if you take the top half of an actress named Radha Mitchell and combine it with the bottom half of Gore Vidal's face, you get Hillary Clinton. Then we moved on to creating more elaborate works of art and then actual beautiful objects. These are not computer simulations of beautiful objects. These were actual beautiful objects that our art department created. Anyway, it was a success. I think we turned a table of contents into something both meaningful and beautiful. From there, we moved on to expressing our dissatisfaction with what we were doing with magazine covers. I mean, magazine covers kind of look like magazine covers, and so we decided that we would try to do something different. In our first attempt, and I have to say that at many phases along this process toward discovering that everything is possible, we failed. And the first attempt at redoing our covers was, we thought, well, the cover always has a logo, but it's always at the top of the cover. Why should it be there? And we got one of our photographers to work with us, and we created actual logos, big life-size logos of Esquire. And we had this idea that we would have our cover subjects interact with the logo. And this was one example of what any famous person could do with it. And we had 15 of these photos taken. We thought, no, that would be cool. Turned out this was a complete and total failure. As you can see, when we tried to do an experiment with the actor Benicio del Toro, the Esquire logo was never found. We put an ad in, it was in the Los Angeles River. We put an ad in the Los Angeles Times on Craigslist, and the New York Times did a little piece about us helping us try to find our logo. So from there we moved on, and there's another moment of despair in my life that happens virtually every month, and that's when you sit down and you try to write cover lines. I was having a particular one, for this one September issue, because we had this guy on the cover named Daniel Craig, who at the time was not yet James Bond. He was about 3-4 months away from becoming James Bond. All he was a British actor who everybody was saying was going to be the worst James Bond in history. So I was sitting at my desk thinking, this is going to be a complete and total failure. I had a nice picture, and was writing really conventional cover lines, but didn't know what to do. So I ended up writing a summary of the issue and handing it to my design director and saying, these are your cover lines. It was lots of words. I summarized the entire issue. And he went away, and he came back 15 minutes later, and he said, I don't know what you mean. And I said, well, imagine that behind me is the Vietnam War Memorial with its, all those names, all those words, just like it's a wall. And imagine that I'm Daniel Craig. That's what I want. I want it to feel like there's this wall of words, this wall of type. And he came back and he created this thing, which at the time was kind of radical. It was like overwhelming type and full, complete sentences. A year after Katrina, Tom Junot talks to the New Orleans nursing home villains, and 5 years after 9/11, work finally begins at ground zero, and we're still pissed off. It was like long, involving sentences that indicated there was something more than a famous person in this magazine. So over the last several years, we've gone through every iteration we can of this wall of type. Sometimes it just has to be big, and you don't even need to be able to read the words. Sometimes you just handwrite it, and that's actually one sentence that comprises every one of those lines. Then we start playing with perspective, as though the words were written on the walls. Just pure power. Again, with the perspective and hiding words and letters. It's like actually causing people at the newsstand to use their imaginations to figure out what's going on. We've continued to do this for quite a while. And around this time, after we'd established this sort of wall of type thing, we were about to publish our 75th anniversary issue. We had taken as our theme for the 75th anniversary issue, not something to look back, but our theme was the 21st century begins now. And so our question as we've been preparing this issue was, why don't magazine covers move? Everything else moves. It's paper, but still it should move. And so for about a year before that issue came out, we were working with a company called E-Ink, which now everybody knows because they power all the Kindles and all these e-reader devices that work with electronic paper. And we created this cover where things actually kind of moved and flashed and stuff on the cover. And as queer as it looks as a slide, as a little movie, it was pretty impressive when we launched this at Borders, and there were 100 of these covers up, and there were things moving on our covers. Then we went back to our manufacturing partners, and we'd ask them, what can we do with paper and ink that's never been done before? They offered us a number of solutions, but shortly after this cover, we started playing around with some origami. And the first was this cover, where after President Obama had been elected, we asked the question, what now? And then we used a flap on the cover just to begin to answer that question right on the cover. Minor little thing. Then the next was maybe my favorite example of a really simple idea turning into something semi-radical. You'll have to indulge this little movie I'm going to play for a second. We just perforated the covers. We had 3 covers. The issue was called How to Be a Man. And we took 3 examples of American manhood, perforated the covers, so that you could actually tear the covers apart and create 27 different visions of what the American man looks like. Hang on one second. Justin Timberlake, Barack Obama, and George Clooney. So the whole time that we were doing these things, we were trying to figure out how to make paper more important. There was all this threat from the web and this looming threat from various e-readers coming out. And our intention in all this was to make paper more exciting. We kind of came to the peak of that attempt in December of 2009 when we published our first augmented reality issue. And you got to bear with me here because I have to get out of PowerPoint for a second and show you this thing we did. So I'm going to launch this. Don't look at any of the stuff that's on my screen, please. Okay, and this is the really scary moment. So basically you bought the December issue of Esquire magazine. You can see this big QR code here, paper, and when you hold it up to your little computer, like magic happens. Whoa, wait, no sound. Where's the sound?
That is what this modernist, abstract, interpretive sculpture. Ah!
There we go.
Booyah! In your face! And bless your soul, welcome to the augmented reality issue of Esquire magazine. My name is Robert Downey Jr., and I will be your
by
guide
manipulating the
through what
magazine,
shall
you could actually
henceforth
cause
be
them to do
titled
different things.
The Genius.
This will hitherto be only known as the home invasion portion of this issue. Which reminds me, thank you for having me in your home or office. I'm so glad we had this time together.
So anyway, there were many ways to play with Mr. Downey, and then there were 5 different augmented reality applications inside the issue. Now I pray that I can get this back. And I think it, sorry. I think it genuinely did sort of show that paper could do more things than we'd ever expected. So then along came the iPad. Now, you know, that kind of ruined my life. I mean, I didn't need to like download software to be able to do this. It's like we had this iPad. So our reaction to the pad was to try to continue sort of messing with people, with what people expected from it. Yes, we put a monthly magazine on the iPad, but we redesign every element of it. We reconceive and redesign every element of it. And we try to take what magazines do and then enhance them with what we do in the magazine. So I'll give you a few examples of what we do with our covers. Our first issue on the iPad was last October, featuring Javier Bardem, and we asked him to do this simple little cover trick.
Hello, I am Javier Bardem. Welcome to Esquire magazine.
So every issue since we've done something with our cover, and we do variations on inside. We've had the Sexiest Woman Alive kind of writhing in your hands. We've had, and I'll show you a couple more. Silent movies. It's one of my favorites. Liam Neeson.
Welcome to Esquire magazine.
And finally, a current cover.
No. Here's Anthony. Watson. Hurry it out. I'm going to cost you. Hey, I'm Matthew McConaughey, and welcome to Esquire.
Anyway, it's like fun with magazines. So beyond what we're doing on the iPad with the monthly magazine, we've actually just entered the realm of gaming. In June, we'll be launching something that we're calling Esquire's Hardest Puzzle Ever. It's based on these puzzles we used to run in our Best and Brightest issues that were genuinely designed to be the hardest puzzles ever, hardest quizzes ever. The whole genius community online went crazy for them. I have a really poor representation of it, but it's a two-pronged thing. There'll be 6 different levels. They get harder as they go along, and it begins kind of like a Rubik's Cube. And Rubik's Cube has 6 sides, and you have to solve the visual puzzle of each side. And when you do, it gives you a word clue. When the 6 clues are solved, it adds up to one big clue, and if you get that, you move on to the next level. Every time it gets harder. So instead of having 6 sides, there are 4 sides to each cube, as you'll see here. You have 8, then 12, then 16, and it's all like touch-enabled by the iPad. So you have to solve the Rubik's Cube first, and then you'll get a verbal cue. And this is like if you were playing with it, you'd be manipulating it to try to solve these things. And then once the image clue is solved, it gives you a verbal clue. We all know what President Clinton's code name was, of course. It's coming up. and you're smart. Congratulations. So that'll be launching in June. It's an interesting business model. There are 2 free levels that we'll be giving away. One is the first level that we created, and the other is created by a sponsoring advertiser. So you get 2 free levels at a certain level of difficulty, and then to get the next 5 levels, you pay, I think it's $4.99. It'd be kind of cool. But sort of in the realm of taking the magazine out of what magazines normally do into gaming or the next thing, our next sort of big thing is that we're taking Esquire into retail. Right now, we're in the process of launching the largest online department store for men. We've partnered with one of America's largest retailers, and in August, we're going to help launch Clad. It's a commerce site for men's apparel. And it truly will be like Neiman Marcus for men. We'll be partnering to be the editorial and instructional voice of Clad. And, my motivation for doing this is simple. Magazines have always done one essential thing. We've made people want things. And whether what they want is a better life or a new pair of shoes, we make them want things. But for the hundreds of years that magazines have been around, magazines have always stopped short of delivering on that desire. So what we're going to try to do at Esquire is to close the gap between inspiration and action. I want people to go directly from the pages of the magazine or from our website or from our iPad application and to be able to take consumer action based on the desire we've created in our pages. So, one of the truisms of the new media age has been that it's bad to be old media. The thinking has been that disintermediation, which I think means that content being distributed without those evil middlemen like magazines or movie studios or publishing houses. The thinking has been that disintermediation would lead to the demise of old brands and old media companies. But I think that what we're seeing is that that's just not true. What I'm finding is that, at least for Esquire, the breaking down of distribution barriers and barriers of all kinds is offering us the same kind of opportunity to invent and reinvent ourselves as it does to some kid sitting in a garage somewhere. I mean, we're making games. We're partnering in the startup of a department store. By breaking down what a magazine is, and that's really been our process over the last 5 years, we've begun to discover what a magazine can be. And what it can be when it's freed of the assumptions and the strictures that we bring to it is anything. It's been an interesting process of discovery these last 5 years at Esquire, and I recommend it to all of you, regardless of what your business is. We went back and we reconsidered the most basic parts of magazine making, and we found something that we'd never imagined. We discovered that everything is possible. So I'm going to show you one last little slide, our next issue on the iPad, and then I'll be done.
Jeff Bridges here. Welcome to Esquire.
All right. That's all I got. Thank you very much.